It's 1 p.m. Tzaraim Tovim in America, Erev Tov in Israel. I want to welcome everybody back to our third series, plus the Hanukkah lecture, our third series. A pleasure to welcome back Shulie Mishkin for her very inspiring, informative, action-packed shiurim. This time we're doing the Masters of the Mishnah. For those who are new, welcome. A pleasure to have you. For those who are coming back, a pleasure to have you too, of course. And okay, Shulie is a graduate of Columbia University, Master's in Jewish History, and been leading tours in Israel, I think, for about 20 years already, through Matan, Pardes, Darkaynu, and now she's only doing virtual tours. And what will cheer us all up is when we can take a real tour with her in Israel in person, in Yirtzeh Hashem, in the not too distant future. Okay, Shulie, Vakasha, Rav Yohanan and Zakkai, Rabban, Gamliel, and Yavne. Let's go.
Okay, hello everybody. So I'm excited to do this series. This series grew out of a much shorter 1 hour virtual, like an overview of the Tanaim, and I said there was so much to talk about. We didn't get anywhere near finishing what I wanted to do, so I decided I'm expanding it, and Rabbi Kalman graciously offered this this forum again. So we are going to be looking, let's share our PowerPoint. And we'll start. Okay, we're going to be looking at the very turbulent years after the destruction of the Second Temple. Okay, and we're going to look at a timeline in a minute, but basically we're talking about the time period from post-Great Revolt, Churban Bayit, destruction of the Second Temple, and we're going to go up until the end of the Tannaitic period, up until the generation of Rabbi Judah the Prince in 5 sessions, including a little look at everyday life that we know about from archaeology. This is an extremely important time period. As much as Second Temple period really shaped the Jewish people in so many different ways, the Churban, the destruction, really presented challenges that could have, God forbid, ended our sojourn as a people. And we are very fortunate in having the sages that we did and that we're going to be speaking about to address these challenges. So what do they have to do? They have to rebuild Jewish life after the Churban. That's really what we're going to be dealing with today. And that's the picture that you have here, from Beit Mikdash to Beit Midrash. This is the closed up Choda gates on the Temple Mount. How do we survive? How do we continue without a temple? And we'll understand why that is such a significant change. There is a shift in leadership from the Kohanim to the Chachamim, to the sages, from the priests to the sages. Not that the sages did not have significant position in temple times, but the priests were really in the highest position, and that changes completely once the temple is destroyed. How do we continue remembering the temple while going on and living without it? Besides that, you have the challenge of overcoming the sectarian divisions, keeping out Christianity, remaining a united Jewish people, dealing with Rome, the second trauma of the Barcode Revolt, right, which is going to come 65 years after the destruction of the temple, and perhaps is arguably worse than the destruction of the temple. Economic challenges, the rising power of Babylonian Jewry, which is not a bad thing, but it does pose a challenge to the leadership in Eretz Yisrael. Who is in charge? Who has primacy? And perhaps the most important, and that's really, we're going to touch on that today, but we're going to deal most with it in the fourth lecture. How do we keep the tradition? How do we keep the Masorah, the oral tradition that ultimately becomes written down? Who navigates these waters? Where do they live? What are they trying to accomplish? That's what we're going to try to do. Today, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction, and then we're going to dive into Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai and what he does in Yavne. So a quick intro, right? A quick timeline review and a few other things that are a little bit of review from things I've done before. So we'll do it quickly. Just an understanding of a timeline. Okay? Great Revolt from 66 to 70. All these years, of course, are a common era. Okay? The year 70, the destruction of the temple. The year 73, the fall of Masada. And post-destruction of the temple, the whole story of Yavne and Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, like I said, we're going to deal with today. 115 to 117, we have yet another revolt against Rome, the Trajan Revolt. We don't know very much about it. It seems to have had little effect in the land of Israel, greater effect in the diaspora. 132 to 135, the Barcode Revolt, which is a huge trauma in terms of our relationship with Jerusalem. Jewish settlement patterns change. Many, many Jews are killed and taken prisoner. That's really going to be our focus next time, right? Next week, and we'll talk about Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba. But post Bar Kokhba, Jewish life moves to the north. Jerusalem is off limits. The Sanhedrin moves north, okay? And we have this trajectory that we're going to examine in a minute on the map. Usha, Shfar'am, Beit Sharim, Tzipori, Tiberias. Our period really ends more or less, right? None of these dates are exact, with the redaction of the Mishnah by Rebbe by Rabbi Judah the Prince. Just a couple of terms we're going to be throwing around, right? We are talking about the time period of the Tanaim. A Tana technically is the guy who memorizes all of these oral laws, oral traditions, and stands up and says them in front of everybody. But we use the term Tana today to refer to the rabbis of the Mishnah, whose period ends with Rabbi Judah the Prince, Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara. And when we get to the section about Rebbe, we'll talk about Breita, Tosefta. That we'll leave aside for the moment. Okay, the generations. This is important for us to understand for convenience. It's just helpful to have it all in front of us. But it's also nice for us to see who are the teachers and who are the students. And sometimes students very closely follow their teachers, as in Rabbi Yoshua following Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Other times, students go in a very different direction from their teachers, like Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yoshua, right? Rabbi Yoshua very much a moderate, Rabbi Akiva very much a firebrand. So it's good to know who goes where. The dates are obviously approximate. Most of these people live a lot more than 40 or 30 years, but this is to give you a sense of when they mostly are active. Also, I will say that not everybody agrees with this scheme. Right? If you look in the Steinsaltz guide to the Gemara, I don't remember the name of it, but it's a beautiful book that has a lot of introductory stuff. He actually adds a generation before Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he makes some generation 2. But this is what's more or less accepted by most people, and that's why we're going to go with it. So generation 1 from pre-Churban, pre-destruction of the temple till after the destruction of the temple, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel the first, okay? Generation 2, Rabban Gamliel, who becomes the Nasi after his father. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he's also somewhat of a contemporary of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, the two major students of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Third generation, Rabbi Akiva, the student of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yishmael, who always goes with Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who sacrifices himself in order to ensure the next generation of rabbis, and we'll see that next time. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Elisha ben Abuya, who's also known as Acher, who is a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva, a great scholar, but ultimately chooses the way of Rome as opposed to the way of Torah. Generation number 4 are the survivors post Rabbi Akiva. We'll do in the third class, the generation that survives, that has to rebuild after the trauma of Bar Kokhba, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, as well as others. And the 5th generation, the final generation of Tanaim, is Rabbi Shimon ben Chalaf, Sumchos, and many, many others. Before we have the Tanaim, we have the Zugot, the pairs, right? The final ones being Hillel and Shammai, okay? And after the Tanaim, like we said, we have the Amoraim. Where's everybody living? Okay, let's just do a quick look at the map here. Okay, Jews are mostly living Jews are mostly living in Judea, okay, in the Galilee. Okay, and that, of course, is going to expand even more in the time period post Bar Kokhba. Okay, there are also Jews living on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, so that's one of our major populations. Who are our other populations? There's also Jews living here, other side of the Jordan, Perea. We also have, sorry for my scribbles, we also have Samaritans. Okay, Samaritans, a group that sees themselves as the true Jews. Certainly in Second Temple times, the rabbis have a very hostile relationship. The Samaritans have a hostile relationship with the rabbis and vice versa. And that's why often people who were traveling to the temple from the Galilee would not go straight, but would actually go around, because it was friendlier to travel through Transjordan than to travel through Samaria. Okay, we also have the people who are living on the coast, which are Phoenicians, Greeks, right? The whole Hellenized world. There are Jews there as well. There are Jews who live in Caesarea. There are Jews who live in Akko, but this is less of a Jewish culture, okay? And in the south, we have the Edomians, the Nabateans. So we have different groups living in different places. Even among the Jews of Yehuda and the Jews of the Galil are not the same, and we have a lot of hints at that in the Mishnah and the Gemara. There are different mores, different language. A lot of times, right? Anshe Yehuda shamru al lishonam. They kept their language, meaning they still spoke Hebrew, whereas in the Galilee, they're speaking Aramaic or even Greek. We have a lot of differences. We'll get to that on other occasions. We also have Jews who live in the diaspora, right? We have Jews who live in the diaspora. The very first diaspora is Egypt and Babylonia. Okay, let's just color those in again for a moment. Okay, so we have the Jews of Egypt, already from the destruction of the first temple, and of course the Jews of Babylonia taken in the exile. But this expands, and we have Jewish community in what's called Asia Minor up here, right, in the areas of what we call today Lebanon and northern Syria, Antioch, Sulamash El Tzor, which is arguably in the land of Israel. Okay, and we have Jewish communities as far flung as Greece and Rome. Okay, so all of these are outside of the confines of the land of Israel, but very, very connected to Eretz Israel, right? So for example, many people, nobody's going 3 times a year from Babylonia or from Rome on Aliyah Larega, on the pilgrimage, but they definitely will try to do that at least a few times in their lives, make their way to Jerusalem. In addition, they're giving their half shekel tax to the temple, right? So we definitely have connections. We have the fascinating phenomenon of what Shai Cohen calls unity within diversity, that everybody here is speaking different languages, eating different food, dressing in different ways, and yet they are all Jews. They all have many commonalities. But keep in mind, and this is something that's important to understand, especially when you're reading sources in the Gemara, the Jews of Babylonia are very different than the Jews, for example, of Rome or even of Eretz Israel. The Jews of Babylonia are under the leadership of the Parthians. Everybody else here is under the Romans, right? The Roman Empire basically ends over here. Judea is the frontier, and everybody beyond that frontier are under a different culture. So the language in Babylonia is different, the culture, the laws, the topography, and the climate for sure. So a lot of times we read the Talmud Bavli and we assume that they're talking about conditions in Eretz Israel. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. And we're not going to talk so much about the diaspora today, but it will come up on other occasions. Okay, and just one more thing about the Sanhedrin, right? Very important, famous Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that talks about the stations of the Sanhedrin, or the Nidudei HaSanhedrin, the migrations of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, of course, is in Jerusalem. In Lishkat Gazid, in the hewn stone chamber in the temple. But as things start getting worse in Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin moves first within Jerusalem, and then with the destruction of Jerusalem, moves to Yavne. Okay, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then moves to the north, moves to Usha, Shfar'am, Beit Sha'arim, Tzipori, and ultimately to Tiberias, right? And the Gemara there says, Tveria amukami kulam. Tveria is the deepest of all. Why? Well, pshat, topographically, it is. It's the lowest, but it's also the deepest in the sense that the Masorah, the oral traditions, the learning in the land of Israel continues in Tiberias for hundreds and hundreds of years, really until the end of great learning in Eretz Israel, at least in the Middle Ages. It's in Tiberias. Okay, one more thing about where people are. Okay, we have this beautiful Gemara in Sanhedrin that tells us a lot of locations, meaning the Gemara's job is not to tell us where people lived, but a lot of times it will just come up, right? Rabban Gamliel was traveling to Akko, or, Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta lives in Tzipori. So sometimes we hear about it, but a lot of times we don't. And this is one of the few places where we actually have a nice list of where is everybody. So it's worth looking at, because we're going to talk about a lot of these places. The sages taught, the verse states justice, justice shall you follow, right? Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. This teaches one should follow the sages to the academy where they are found. For example, follow after Rabbi Eliezer to Lud. We're going to talk about Lud today. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol. After Rabban ben Yohanan ben Zakkai to Bur Chayil, right? He's most associated with Yavne, but he actually lives nearby in a place called Bur Chayil. After Rabbi Yoshua to Pekin in the Galilee. After Rabban Gamliel to Yavne. After Rabbi Akiva to Bnei Brak, we'll also talk about Bnei Brak today. After Rabbi Matya to Rome. After Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion to Sichnai. After Rabbi Yossi to Tzipori. After Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera to Nitzivim. After Rabbi Yoshua to the exile, to Babylonia. After Rebbe to Beit Sha'arim. And after the sages in the time of the temple to the chamber of the hewn stone. So we're going to take a look at some of these places. By the way, just nice to know, Israel in the last few years has marked out a hiking trail that is called the Sanhedrin Trail. And you can travel from Usha to Shfar'am to Beit Sha'arim to Tzipori to Tveria. And all along the way, there are markers that tell you about the people who were there. And it's actually a really nice thing. Okay, so let's start with Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Okay, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is known to be the youngest of the students of Hillel. We're going to see that source in a minute. Hillel has 80 students. Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is the youngest one, or Katan could be the smallest one, but he certainly becomes the greatest one. He is fascinating because he really straddles the generations of the temple and the Churban. Okay, as you may have noticed, or you knew already for a long time, he has this unusual title. He's not Rabbi or Rav. He's Rabban, which only is given to a Nasi, to the head of the Sanhedrin. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is the very rare exception. He is not a head of the Sanhedrin. He doesn't even have really an official position, but he gets this honorific of Rabban because he is such an important figure. He lives in the Galilee, then he eventually moves to Jerusalem, and we're going to see that he is in Jerusalem during the Great Revolt on the eve of the destruction of the temple.
I'm going up because I have to go to bed.
Okay, people who are not muted, please mute. And we have lots of different sources about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. I brought you a couple to give you a sense of, first of all, his greatness, right? So we have this Gemara and Sukkah. The sages said about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer, in all his days, he never engaged in idle conversation. He never walked 4 cubits without engaging in Torah study and donning phylacteries. No person ever preceded him into the study hall. He never said anything he did not hear from his teacher, which is something that his student Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus carries on. He never says something new. He always retains the ancient traditions. And he never has said to his students, the time has arrived to arise and leave the study hall, except on Passover Eve and on Yom Kippur Eve. So he's very, very diligent. We have other sources that talk about all the different branches of Torah he knows. A smaller little detail, but I find it very beautiful because it's very evocative. Right? Take a look at this source here, Psachim. They said about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai that he would sit in the street adjacent to the Temple Mount in the shade of the sanctuary and expound to a large number of people all day long. Now, what's going on here? Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is one of these teachers, one of these scholars who's not just a scholar that was brilliant, but he's actually a very charismatic teacher, and people really want to listen to him. And when the temple is standing, he has these huge crowds. You can imagine probably on holidays, right, on Ole Regel, on pilgrimage times, and he gives these public lectures. But you can also imagine anyone who's been in Jerusalem in the summertime, right, Sukkot time, or even Pesach time, it gets rather hot there in the middle of the day, and there's no room, there's no auditorium, right? We don't have the International Convention Center in the year 60 CE. So where does he sit that it's going to be cool? So he would sit. Take a look at how tall the sanctuary of the temple, the Heichal, is, and at the right time of day, in the right position, it casts a nice shade, a nice shadow. So he would sit in the shadow, and that's where he would teach. So you get this vision of, first of all, life on the Temple Mount that's not all about sacrifices. It's also about coming and learning Torah and engaging, and this kind of Yarchei Kala, Limud, or whatever you want to call it. Everybody sitting and learning together, and how he's sitting in the shadow of the Mikdash. Right? And the final source I brought you here is a Yerushalmi. I brought it in Hebrew. I'll translate it, but it's a prescient thing that Hillel says about his students. Shmonim zug shel tamidim hayalo Hillel hazaken. Right here it says pairs. In another source it says 80 total, but he says 80 pairs of students the elder Hillel had. Gadol shebahem Yonatan ben Uziel, the oldest or the greatest was Yonatan ben Uziel, right, who writes the Targum, the translation to the Torah, the Aramaic translation. Katan shebahem Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. And the smallest was Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Pam achat chala. Okay, once Hillel got sick. Nichnesu kulan lebakro. Everybody comes to visit him to do bikur cholim. Amad lo Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai b'chatzer. But Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, he's the youngest. He's shy. He stays in the courtyard. Amar lahen. Hillel says to them, Hechanu akatan shebachem. Where's that small one? Shehu av lechochma ve'av ledorot. He might be the smallest, but he's a father for wisdom and a father for the generations. And we're going to see that that really is what Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is. It's not just that he's wise and that he's a scholar and that he's a teacher, but that he is somebody who's going to pass on his teachings to the generations and save them for the generations. So we have in Pirkei Avot, right, very famous passage in Pirkei Avot, the students of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. So Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples, right? Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, known as Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, we're going to talk about him later, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Yossi the priest, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, right? Some of the greats of this generation. Rabban Yochanan used to list their outstanding virtues. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is a plastered cistern which loses not a drop. Bor seed she'eno me'abed tipa. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, ashrei yoldato, happy is the woman that gave birth to him. Rabbi Yossi is pious. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel is one who fears sins. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is like a spring that ever gathers force, a mayan hamitgaber. And I wanted to bring you these pictures because I just think, sometimes we read this, you read it, you know it, you hear it many times. You don't really think about the metaphors. And the metaphors are actually very powerful. Okay? When he says Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is a bor seed she'eno me'abed tipa, he's a plastered cistern that doesn't lose a drop. Okay? That's the picture that you have over here on the left. This is a cistern from Masada. Cistern's very, very useful. You have to collect the rainwater in the winter and save it for the summertime. So you make these nice big holes in the ground and you have channels that lead to them, but those holes are not useful in any way unless you plaster them, because if you don't put plaster on the walls, all the water is going to seep out. Okay? This is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. He holds in his mind all the traditions of the past. Okay? And he says that. He says, I never said anything that I did not hear from my rabbis. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, I'm not going to talk about him today, but he has a very tragic life. He has a tragic end to his life, rather. He's put into Cherem, he's excommunicated. And at the end of his life, his students come to him and he says, I had so much Torah. I'm like a rolled up Torah scroll. I had so much that I could have taught you and I didn't teach you. And his position, his job is to pass on those traditions to the next generation. He's not an originator. He's a preserver. Okay. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, we're going to talk about a little more. He is a spring. He's a Ma'ayan HaMitgaber. And that's what you have here, this beautiful Ma'ayan, this beautiful spring of Ein Prat. What's a spring? A spring is not a cistern. It doesn't stay in one place. It's always moving. It's always changing. It's a creative person who's always coming up with new ideas. Doesn't necessarily keep the old ideas, right? But he's always, I don't know if that's true about Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, but he's always flowing with new ideas. And once you have these pictures, I think the images become much more powerful, and you understand how Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai really understood all his students and their good qualities. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach has not a great end. What's interesting is when you read in those Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot, he's considered one of the most brilliant of the students. Right, we talk about putting all the scholars in one side of the scale, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach in the other, and he's stronger than everybody. He's heavier than everybody, but we rarely hear about him. He doesn't show up a lot in the Mishnah and the Gemara, and we have a reason for that. Okay, we have a few different sources. I brought you from Avot to Rabbi Natan, and the Gemara and Shabbos. We also have in the Midrash and Kohelet Rabbah, right? all the students are by Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai. And when they're getting ready to leave, Elazar said, I am going to Damsit, a place with good, sweet water. They said, we will go to Yavne, a place where there is an abundance of scholars who love the Torah. So he went to Damsit, the beautiful place with good, sweet water, and his reputation in Torah study diminished. They went to Yavne, the place where there's an abundance of scholars who all love the Torah, and their reputations in Torah study grew. So Rabbi Elazar ben Arach decides to separate from his colleagues. Now, it doesn't give us a reason why. We have another source of this story, which tells us where is Damsit, because we've never heard of a place called Damsit. It's actually a corruption of a Greek word that means bathhouse. But in the other source, in Kohelet Rabbah, it talks about how he goes to be with his wife in Emmaus. And that's the pictures that I showed you down here. I'm showing you down here. Emmaus was a beautiful village in Emek Ayalon. Today, it's where Park Canada is. These are pictures of Park Canada, very close to Latrun. It was a Roman village that was very fruitful, that was very beautiful, that had springs. And then the Arabs continued and made all these water installations. And that's what you're seeing in the picture here. There's even an amazingly preserved Roman bathhouse. That's the picture here on the right, Damsit, a bathhouse. And that's Emmaus. Now he separates from the others. Why? So some suggest that maybe he doesn't agree with Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's approach that we're going to see, and he doesn't want to insult him, so he goes to live somewhere else. According to the Medrash and Kohelet Rabbah, he goes because he wants to be with his wife, and places all the blame on the wife. It's always the wife. And he says, but my colleagues are not coming to see me, right? Nobody's coming to see me and to consult with me. I should go to them. And she says, oh, who's more important, you or them, right? Do the mice go to the food, or does the food go to the mice? So he says, oh, okay, I'll wait. And nobody comes, right? Nobody comes. And he stays in this beautiful place that doesn't have Torah. And it becomes so bad that if you look at the second source here, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach happened to come there to Damsit, and he was drawn after them, and his Torah learning was forgotten. When he returned, he stood to reach from a Torah scroll and was supposed to read the verse, this month shall be for you, HaChodesh hazeh lachem. And instead he read, HaCheresh haya libam, have their hearts become deaf. He can't read anymore, right? It's very, very terrible circumstances. Is it really so bad? Or Chazal exaggerating? But they're definitely making the point that when you separate from your colleagues and you go to a place that has nice living conditions but no Torah, not a great choice. But we're going to come back to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? And the understanding of what he needs to do. Why is the destruction of the temple so terrible? Okay, so really the best illustration of this is not the pictures I'm going to show you, but Rav Yoel ben Nun wrote a beautiful article many years ago. Hechan hi beitenu ha'amiti, where is our true home, right? And he says, rather than asking, well, what don't we have now that we don't have the temple? He says, what do we have, right? Our holidays have changed. Our gatherings have changed. Our entire communication with God has changed. Our Yom Kippur, which used to culminate with knowing that God has given us a good year, now he says it's like a beloved that writes letters to her lover and they're never answered. So the temple is the focal point of everything, of ritual, of scholarship. The Sanhedrin sits there, political leadership, and of course our connection to God. And without that, it's a devastating, devastating moment for the Jewish people. So just to understand a little bit, right, why is it so important? So we talk about Aliyah Regel, right? Jews coming from all over the diaspora and all over the lands of Israel, coming to Jerusalem for the Regel, for the holidays. Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, the roads on the way prepared already the month before, right? Rosh Chodesh Adar tonight. Sanhedrin is going to start getting ready for the people to start coming, clearing the roads, marking the graves, cleaning out the mikvaot. Right? This is a beautiful mikvah on Derech HaAvot, about a 10-minute walk from my house, which is on the main road to Jerusalem from the south, and you go to the mikvah on the way because you need to be pure before you get there. You make it to Jerusalem, you come, you meet so many other people from all over the Jewish world here at the Shilach Pool in the city of David, in the picture on the left, and then you start, after you have heard the news, got some water, found a place to stay, you start going, in the picture on the right, up the road, the Pilgrim's Road, that's going to take you to the foot of the Temple Mount. And really, I think we have to see this as not just a ritual or a holiday thing, but it's very much a social situation as well, right? And Chazal talk about it. This is just great because it was discovered recently. Imagine all these people are coming. Somebody's going to lose something, right? People are going to lose stuff. And in fact, this gorgeous earring that you see here was actually found in the excavations in the Givati parking lot across from the City of David Visitor Center. This is a lady who went to Jerusalem on pilgrimage, and she lost her beautiful earring. And it came out of the ground looking like this, by the way, once they cleaned off the dirt, because gold stays beautiful forever. So I feel bad for her, but I'm glad that we have the earring. But people lost things. And a few years ago, when they were excavating this Pilgrim's Road, they found some kind of a podium. And it's strange. We don't know what this could be. And one suggestion is this is something called the Even HaToen, right? We hear in the Gemara, and take a look here in the Gemara in Tanit, the sages taught in a Braita, there was a claimant stone, an Even HaToen. There's a lost and found. Anyone who lost an item would be directed there. Anyone who found a lost item would be directed there. The finder would stand and proclaim his find. The owner would stand and provide distinguishing marks and take the item. This is the place about which we learned in the Mishnah. And also we have another source in Bava Metzia, when the rain is pouring down, go and see if the Even HaToen has been obscured by the rising waters. So we have this very powerful center that is really at the center of everything that's going on in Jewish life, even if you don't get there very often. But you know that this is where the people gather. This is where God connects to us. This is how we serve God. Holidays ideally are meant to be spent in Jerusalem. Anybody who's learning Daf Yomi now and has been immersed in Psachim for a few months there, right? Pesach is not meant to be when you're in your home and you take out your beautiful china and you clean like crazy. It's certainly not meant to be a Pesach program in Arizona. It's supposed to be in Jerusalem. You are supposed to be in Jerusalem. And without that, everything is different. And that's how the Jewish people have been living for centuries. But things are starting to get worse and worse. The Zealots are starting to get more and more powerful. The Jews begin to battle against the Romans in the year 66. They are buoyed by some victories that they have in the very beginning. These are some coins that were struck by the rebels. These are from year 3. But as the war goes on, things get worse and worse. And Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai already had predicted the downfall of the temple. He already saw a few decades earlier that because of corruption and because of widespread just evil, right? He said we shouldn't give the sota waters. We shouldn't have anybody drink that because so this woman maybe committed adultery, but the husband's also committing adultery, right? He sees the doors of the sanctuary opening and he says, why are you opening? We know already the temple's going to be destroyed. So he's very aware of what's happening. And things just keep getting worse. And the Zealots are as much of a problem as the Romans, and that's this very, very famous source we have from the Gemara in Gittin, right? Vespasian Caesar came against the Jews. He came and laid siege to Jerusalem for 3 years. There were at that time in Jerusalem these 3 wealthy people, Nakdimon ben Gurion, ben Kalba Savua, ben Tzitzita Kesef. One of them said to the leaders of the city, I will feed the residents with wheat and barley. I will provide the residents with wine, salt, and oil. I will supply the residents with wood, right? Everything will be able to withstand the siege. It'll be okay. Except there were zealots among the people. The sages said to them, let's go and make peace with the Romans. But the zealots did not allow them to do this. They said, let us go and engage in battle. And the sages said, you will not be successful. And the zealots arose and burned the storehouses. And there was a general famine, right? And Josephus tells us that the Romans sit outside and they say, we can allow the Jews to just kill each other. We don't even need to enter the city, right? It's this very terrible situation of everybody fighting against everybody else. And Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai understands that something needs to be done. Okay, he has a family connection. Right? Abba Sikra was the leader of the Biryoni, of the Zealots of Jerusalem, of which there are many groups, by the way, not only one, and the son of the sister of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? He's his nephew. And he sent a message to him. He said, come to me in secret. He came, and Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, until when will you do this and kill everyone through starvation? Abba Sikra said to him, what can I do? If I say something to them, they will kill me. And we know that there's anarchy among the zealots. Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai said to him, show me a method I will be able to leave the city, and it is possible that through this there will be some small salvation. And he manages to sneak out of the city, right? Famous story. He pretends he's dead. His students carry him out in a coffin. And we have variations on this story, by the way, in 4 different places in rabbinic literature. The most famous one is the one in Gittin, but I brought you this one in Avot de Rabbi Natan. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit more of a modest version of the story, but basically what happens is he gets out of the city. He goes to the general, to Vespasian. He manages to get him to give him a favor, right? And look at the last third here. He gets to Vespasian. They open the coffin. Rabban Yohanan got out and stood before him. He said, so you are Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai. Ask for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. Why? We won't go into that right now. He replied, I ask nothing from you except for Yavne. I will go there and teach my students. I will establish prayer. I will do all the mitzvot in the Torah. Okay, like I said, it's a little bit more modest. He doesn't say, give me Yavne and her sages, which is what it says in Gittin. I just want to go and have a place to learn and to teach, right? And it seems more likely that this is what he would say, right? He's not going to make a big deal out of it. Vespasian replied, go, all that you wish to do, you may do. Okay, so why Yavne? Where is Yavne? Why is Yavne important, right? What is the story here? So Yavne is a small town. Today it's a small town near Rehovot. It's not too far from Ashdod. Why does Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai choose this place, and why does Vespasian agree? Okay, so basically it's far from Jerusalem. Okay, even today, take about an hour from Jerusalem. Certainly in those days, that's good for the Romans, because the Romans say, let's get these troublemakers out of here and away from the city. It's also good for the Jews. Let's get away from those Romans. We don't want to be anywhere near them. Okay, it happens to be land that's owned by the Romans, and they are able to use it as a prison camp. Okay, so they can put whoever they want there. And Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai figures this is a place that I can go and I can reestablish what's going to be lost. Now, important to understand, there's something he doesn't ask for, right? He says, ask whatever you wish, right? I'll give it to you, says Vespasian. And Rabbi Akiva in the Gemara in Gittin says, why didn't he ask that the temple should be spared? He doesn't ask that because he knows it's not going to happen, right? Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is very practical, and he understands that you have to go in the way of practicality and moderation, which is very different from Rabbi Akiva. Now, what does he actually do? So first of all, he's in Yavne when the temple is destroyed. We only hear about that in Avot Rabbi Natan. And very powerful comparison to Eli HaKohen, right, who's hearing about the Ark of God being taken. While Jerusalem was being taken, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was sitting and waiting, and he trembled just as Eli sat and watched. As it says, there was Eli sitting on a seat on the side of the road waiting, and his heart trembled because of the Ark of God. When Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai heard that Jerusalem was destroyed and the Holy Temple was burning in flames, he tore his clothes, and his students tore their clothes, and they cried and screamed and lamented. You have this horrible scene that you can see silently in the stones that have fallen by the southern wall. Okay, but after this terrible reaction of kriya and of mourning, he understands that he has to do something very practical. He has to do very practical things. One, immediate. How do I mourn? Right? Everybody is mourning. This is not to be terribly anachronistic, but this is a Holocaust. How do we mourn? Right? And we have a few sources that deal with this. I brought you 2. One is Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, how to mourn, and one is his student, Rabbi Yoshua. Okay, so take a look at the first source here. Once Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai left Jerusalem, Rabbi Yoshua followed, and he saw the holy temple destroyed. Rabbi Yoshua said, woe to us, this is destroyed, the place where all of Israel's sins are forgiven. Now, remember, we talk about the centrality. It's not only social, political, etc. How are we going to get kapara? How are we going to repent? We can't bring our sacrifices. We can't have our Yom Kippur service. How on earth are we going to continue serving God when we won't be granted atonement? Rabban Yochanan, and that's a very practical question. It's not a spiritual question. Rabban Yochanan said to him, my son, do not be depressed. We have a form of atonement just like it. What is it? Acts of kindness, chesed, right? As it says, chesed chafatzti velo zevach. I desire kindness and not a well-being offering. So Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is already putting into place that there are ways that we can serve God even when we cannot bring the sacrifices. Now, the second source, also very famous source from Baba Batra, Rabbi Yoshua encounters mourners, right, who are just going off the deep end. And they decide that they cannot continue with their lives as they were. And it says, when the temple was destroyed, there was an increase in the number of ascetics among the Jews whose practice was not eat meat and not drink wine. Rabbi Yoshua joined them to discuss their practice. He said to them, my children, for what reason do you not eat meat and do you not drink wine? They said, shall we eat meat from which offerings are sacrificed upon the altar, and now there is no altar? Shall we drink wine, which is poured on the altar, and now there is no altar? So Rabbi Yoshua decides that he's going to engage with them and show them that they cannot, this is not a viable solution. He says, don't eat bread because we don't give mincha, we don't give the bread offerings. Okay, we'll eat fruit. No, you can't eat fruit because we don't give bikurim, we don't give the first fruits. Okay, we'll have the other fruits, not the first fruits. He said to them, you shouldn't drink water because we pour water on the mizbeach. They were silent. Rabbi Yoshua said to them, my children, the second to last paragraph, come and I will tell you how we should act. To not mourn at all is impossible, as the decree was already issued. To mourn excessively is impossible, as the sages do not issue a decree upon the public unless a majority of the public is able to abide by it. Rabbi Yoshua is very aware of what's going to happen. These ascetics, one generation, maybe two generations, they'll live in this extreme way. And then people won't be able to do it anymore, and they won't even remember why it was important, and the whole thing will fall by the wayside. Rabbi Yoshua says, no, take the way of moderation. Find a way that you can mourn, but that you can continue your everyday life. So he says, plaster your house, leave aside a small amount, right? And continues, right? Have a feast, but don't serve one course. Woman should put on her jewelry, but leave one item off. For us, what's not mentioned here, but it's the most enduring symbol for us, is at a wedding, right? At the height of our joy, you put ashes on the forehead of the chatan, you break the glass under the chuppah. We always are remembering. The sign on the side here is from an Italian synagogue, Shachor al-Lavan, Zecher la-Churban, black on white. We remember the temple. And these small things that you do are things that everybody can do, but they can keep the memory alive for generations and for centuries, as opposed to just for a short time period. So that's one problem that has to be solved. But there are other problems as well, right? And what Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai accomplishes in Yavne, he needs to do a few things. You need to remember the temple, but you need to move on. You need to record the tradition. You need to help people to adjust to a new reality. And Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai's takanot, right, his halachic new rules are basically a way to make Yavne take the place of Jerusalem, but only up to a certain extent, right? Because we can never replace Jerusalem, but we need a modus operandi. We need a way to go forward. So Yavne, which is the center where the Sanhedrin is, that becomes the place where you set the calendar. That becomes the place where you have the main court. That becomes a place where people come on pilgrimage, not to the temple, but to ask their questions, right? And we have a famous set of laws in the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah, okay, which show the temple, kind of the things that happened in the temple, only some of them, not sacrifices, moving to Yavne. Okay, so take a look. With regard to the festival of Rosh Hashanah that occurs on Shabbat, in the temple they would sound the shofar, however, they would not sound it in the rest of the country. After the temple was destroyed, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai instituted the people should sound the shofar on Shabbat every place where there is a court of 23 judges. Rabbi Elazar said Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai instituted this practice only in Yavne. Okay, either way, the court is now becoming as important as the temple for certain things. Same idea with the Lulav. At first, during the temple era, the Lulav was taken all 7 days in the temple, all 7 days of Sukkot, and in the rest of the country outside the temple was taken only one day on the first day of the festival, and this is something we still do. After the temple, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai instituted the Lulav should be taken even in the rest of the country all 7 days in commemoration of the temple. Okay, so we are taking certain things and putting them into everyday life, even without a temple. But we don't want to forget that the ultimate reality is the reality with the temple. We don't want to say, oh, we're okay like this way. Some scholars argue, well, Judaism was able to advance because we didn't have a temple anymore. That is definitely not what Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is saying. You are always hoping that the temple will be rebuilt. And the continuation of that Mishnah says that the Yom Hanef Kulo Asur. What does that mean? The day that you bring the Omer sacrifice, right? The second day of Passover, you cut the new crops, the new grain, and the barley, and you bring it to the temple and you sacrifice it, okay? And only after that sacrifice are you allowed to eat from the new grain, right? Now, once the temple is destroyed, you should be able to eat first thing in the morning, right? Because there is no sacrifice. But Rabban and Zakai instituted that for the entire day of waving the Omer, eating the grain of the new crop is prohibited. The Gemara says, why? Okay. Mehira Yavne Beit HaMikdash. We hope that the temple is going to be rebuilt today. And people will say, last year, when the temple was in ruins, didn't we eat from the new crop as soon as the eastern horizon was illuminated? They're going to remember. They're going to say, last year, we ate first thing in the morning. Can't we do that anymore? No, you can't do that because now you have to bring a sacrifice. So we want people to get used to the idea that the reality of the temple is going to return one day. Okay. Now, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai also acts very decisively against his opponents, right? And we have this great story in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, right? Once Rosh Hashanah occurred on Shabbat, all the cities gathered at the great Sanhedrin in Yavne for the festival prayers. Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai said to the sons of Betera, the Bnei Betera, who are some of the leadership in Yavne, Nitka, let's blow the shofar, right? Because here we are in Yavne, even though it's Shabbat. They said to him, Nidon, let's discuss, right? Let's talk about it if we should do this. He said to them, Nitka, nidon. First, let us blow the shofar, and afterwards, when there's time, we'll discuss the matter. After they blew the shofar, the sons of Betera said to Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, let us now discuss. He said to them, okay, Kvar nishma'a Keren b'Yavne. If you wondered where the name of the yeshiva Keren b'Yavne comes from, the horn has already been heard in Yavne. The ein mishivim la'achar ha'masa, and one does not refute a ruling after the action. He was very cleverly, diplomatically got around the problem. We did it already, and that's how it's going to be. So, we said we'd talk about it, but we're not talking about it. Okay. But he's not pro-messianism. You have to understand that this period leading up to the destruction of the temple is a time of many false messiahs, even before, right? We have the whole story of the beginnings of Christianity, and he is not on fire about messianism. And we have this beautiful statement from Avot Rabbi Natan. He would say, Hu haya omer, if you're holding something that you're planting, and someone says to you, the Messiah is here, first you plant your tree, then go out and greet the Messiah. He'll be able to wait. The tree's not going to be able to wait. Who knows if this is really the Messiah? Now, the picture I brought you here is peripherally connected to these two things. In the old city of Jerusalem, there's a synagogue called the Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai Synagogue. It is not from the time of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. It's from the late Middle Ages, from the 15th, 16th century, Sephardic shul. And when it was destroyed by the Jordanians in 1948, then rebuilt in 1967, after it was rebuilt, they put back on a high shelf two items, or maybe they were replacement items, that had been there before. One of them, as you can see, is a shofar. Right? And one is a jug of oil, because the tradition is that when Elijah the prophet comes to announce the Messiah, he's going to come first to the synagogue. So we want to have ready for him his tools of the trade, right? His shofar and his anointing oil. Maybe this is connected to this saying in Avot Rabbi Natan. I don't know, but it's a beautiful idea. Now, the other thing that Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai and the other sages in Yavne need to do is, now that we no longer have the Sanhedrin in a stable place, now that our lives are really not very stable at all, we need to remember the past in order to save the future. And this is the beginning of the process that's going to culminate with the Rebbe, okay? With Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and the redaction of the Mishnah. And we have this very interesting Masechet of Mishnah called Eduyot, right? Witnesses, right? People or testimonies is a better translation, right? Where everybody comes forward and tells, I remember this from the temple. I remember this from here. I remember this from there. And they write it down, right? And the Tosefta, not the Mishnah, but the Tosefta, tells us the story of how this happened. When the sages entered the vineyard in Yavne, Kerem b'Yavne, Kerem and Keren, they're both in the sources. They said in the future, there will come an hour when a person seeks a teaching from the teachings of the Torah and he will not find it, or in the teachings of the scribes and he will not find it. As it says, behold, days are coming and they will seek the word of the Lord and they will not find it. Okay? The word of God refers to prophecy. The word of God refers to end of days. So there shall not be one word of Torah similar to its fellow. They said, let us begin from Hillel and Shammai. And they start to take down all of these teachings so that they will be remembered. And the picture is the beautiful stained glass window depiction of all of the six parts of the Mishnah. And that we'll come back to in our fourth session. Okay, one more thing that happens in Yavne, that happens with the destruction of the temple, is that the Kohanim lose their high position. Okay, the Kohanim, the priests, had really been extremely significant. The Romans saw them, the high priest, as the leader of the Jews. They have a lot of importance in temple times. Temple is destroyed. They are basically demoted. They're not completely demoted. They retain their honorary position. They still get, the first Aliyah to the Torah. They still get to do Birkat Kohanim, all sorts of other things. But basically, the power and the authority goes to the rabbis, and we see this very clearly in Pirkei Avot in the very beginning. Towards the end, we have the chain of tradition in the beginning. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. Who's missing? Kohanim. There are no Kohanim in the chain of tradition. There might be individual rabbis who are Kohanim, but the Kohanim are not a group that are in this chain. Right? And later on in Pirkei Avot, in the final chapter, right, greater is learning Torah than the priesthood, and then royalty. For royalty is acquired by 30 stages and the priesthood by 24, but the Torah by 48. Torah, knowledge is supreme, not lineage. And that's why you can have supreme teachers of Torah who are Baalei Tshuva, who start out not at knowing anything, like Rabbi Akiva or like Reish Lakish, and even who are converts, right? Rabbi Meir, the descendant of converts. Okay? So that's a fascinating change. In the picture, you have a piece of an inscription that was discovered in Caesarea, which shows you the cities of the Mishmarot Kuna, the 24 orders of the Kohanim. This is hundreds of years after the temple has been destroyed, and it still remains important, right? And we still hear about these places. They still have populations of priests, and this was something that was put on the walls of synagogues, but it's much more of an honorary position as opposed to an authoritative position. And just to sum up this whole idea of Yavne, right, and these are some pictures here from the tell of Yavne. There's very little that is physical from our time period that is left in Yavne. The tell has been explored, but there's very little from this time. The beautiful tower that you're seeing is from the Mamluks, from about 600 years ago. Their crusader remains. Very little from Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai's time, but the physical remains are not the point. And the quote I brought you here is from a scholar named Yuval Shachar. And he asked the question, he says, why is Yavne so important? Yavne only lasts for a few decades. There aren't a huge number of scholars in Yavne. Other places become much more significant. And there are even other centers at the same time as Yavne, as we're going to see. And yet, he says it's so significant because it creates a template for rabbinic leadership in time of crisis. And that template is followed over and over and over again. Unfortunately, in Jewish history, we have many times of crisis. And he says there was Yavne before Ushat, Tzipori, and Tveria, but there was no Yavne before Yavne, right? It sounds banal, but it's actually a very deep truth that Yavne is a changing in the direction of understanding of what to do in a cataclysmic event. How do you carry on, and how do you do that effectively? Now, to have an example of a group that did not do that, that did took a very different path, the Zealots at Masada, who are contemporaries of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. And they go to Masada, and they're in their last stand against the Romans, and here's the northern palace in Masada and the synagogue, and they make this decision as recorded by us, by Josephus for us, where they decide that rather than submit to the Romans and give up their sovereignty and their independence, they say, we are the last Jews. We are the last Jews who are still free and still independent, and therefore we need to commit suicide, right? Because we want to go out showing that we did not submit, right? So you have, on the one hand, this idealism, but it's an idealism that doesn't look to the future. Whereas Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai is obviously an idealist, but he's a very practical idealist. And I think you can say, you can put them, juxtapose them and say, you have something that you choose to die for or something that you choose to live for, right? And Masada is saying we have something to die for, but Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai says, no, we have something to live for, and we have to figure out how to do that. And that's why when I was writing this up, I said, okay, my line here is that's why we have schools named Yavne and we don't have schools named Masada. And I actually Googled that. There really are schools named Masada, but they're very misguided. So what can I tell you? Not everybody knows their history. Okay, let's talk a little about Rabban Gamliel. We still have a few things we want to finish up. Rabban Gamliel is the Nasi, right, at the end of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's time period. And his challenge is also very, very important, and that is to bring the Jewish people together. We are coming out of a period of intense sectarianism, right? Where we have the Sadducees and we have the Essenes and we have the Pharisees, and that essentially comes to an end with the destruction of the temple. And he has to create a big tent, right? Shaya Cohen talks about how Yavne is the end of sectarianism. You have to figure out how to include everyone with certain red lines. And that's why some of the major stories about Rabban Gamliel are about how he stops divisions. He stops fighting. Even sometimes it seems at the expense of the dignity or the honor of certain sages. So the story that I brought you here from Bava Metzia is the culmination of this very disturbing and powerful story about the excommunication of Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus. And Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus is such a holy, a saintly figure that his distress is felt in the physical world. And that's what this Gemara is talking about. Even Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin at Yavne, the head of the sages who was responsible for the decision to ostracize Rabbi Elazar, was coming on a boat, and a large wave swelled over him and threatened to drown him. Rabban Gamliel said, it seems to me this is only for the sake of Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, as God punishes those who mistreat others. So Rabban Gamliel stood on his feet and said, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that neither was it for my honor that I acted when ostracizing him, nor the honor of my father. Rather, it was for your honor, so that disputes will not proliferate in Israel. In response, the sea calmed from its raging. And we're going to see one more story like that. But just before we move on to that, the picture here is what's called the tomb of Rabban Gamliel in Yavne. It's actually a Mamluk building, and the Muslims call it the tomb of Abu Huraira, who was a friend of Muhammad. It's clearly a Mamluk building, but it doesn't mean there couldn't be another layer below. This is Yavne, and Rabban Gamliel does live in Yavne, so not impossible that he's buried here. Now, we have a few sources that talk about this ending of sectarianism, even though the Gemara doesn't really like to talk about ending sectarianism. We have the famous statement in Brachot. Rabbi Levi said, the blessing of the heretics, Birkat HaMinim, right? We have 18 blessings in Shmona Esrei. No, we have 19 blessings in Shmona Esrei. One was added saying, Malshinim al Tihi Tikva, that we want to get anybody who doesn't believe in the basic principles of Torah, they have to leave this big tent, and we want them to feel uncomfortable in the synagogue. So Rabbi Levi says the blessing of the heretics was instituted in Yavne. Rabban Gamliel said to the sages, is there any person who knows to institute the blessing of the heretics? Shmuel HaKatan stood and instituted it. Now it says here in this translation, but this is against the Sadducees. It's not only the Sadducees, it's the Sadducees, it's the Essenes, it's the early Christians. Okay. We want to include machloket, we want to include differences of opinion, but there are limits to those differences of opinion. One of those limits, by the way, is the calendar. We have to have one calendar, because without one calendar, we are not one people. And the picture on the right is a sundial from Qumran, right, from the Essenes. And Rabban Gamliel insisted on one calendar. And we have a famous story in the Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah, where Rabban Gamliel determines the calendar, and he says, okay, Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is on this day, and Rabbi Yeshua says, no, I don't agree with how you saw the new moon, and I'm going to make it a different day, but privately. Rabban Gamliel sent a message to Rabbi Yeshua, I decree against you, you must appear before me with your staff and your money on which Yom Kippur occurs according to your calculations, right? I want you to appear publicly desecrating your Yom Kippur, because if you keep a private Yom Kippur, that's going to lead to more divisions. He took his staff, Rabbi Yoshua took his staff and his money in his hand and went to Yavne to Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred, according to his calculations. Upon seeing him, Rabban Gamliel stood up and kissed him on his head. He said, come in peace, my teacher and my student, my teacher in wisdom, my student, as you accepted my statement. All right, and that's Rabban Gamliel's role. I'll just do one more thing, and then I'm going to leave Lud and Bnei Brak for next time, because it took a little longer than I thought. He also has to deal with early Christianity, right? The early days of Christianity, Christians are Jews, right? And they are very tied up one with the other. And the rabbis very much want to separate, right? And that's part of this Birkat HaMinim. And we have examples of how close they are, right? So we have a story about Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, who is accused of being a heretic. He's very distressed by this. And Rabbi Akiva says, maybe you spoke to one of these heretics, one of these Jewish Christians, and you heard some Torah from him. Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus remembered he was walking on the main street of Tzipori, that's right here, and Jacob of Kfar Sachnaya, Yaakov Ish Kfar Sachnaya, he's like the classic Jewish Christian in our sources, came and told him some Torah, and it pleased him. Okay, now the same Yaakov Ish Kfar Sachnaya is going to show up in the other Gemara here, in the Gemara from Avodah Zarah, which is a very, very extreme Gemara. An objection was raised. No man should have any dealing with minim, nor is it allowed to be healed by them, even in risking an hour's life. It once happened to Ben Dama, the son of Rabbi Yishmael's sister, that he was bitten by a serpent, and Jacob, a native of Kfar Sachmaya, came to heal him, but Rabbi Yishmael did not let him. Whereupon Ben Dama said, my brother Rabbi Yishmael, let him, so I may be healed by him. I will even cite a verse from the Torah that is to be permitted, but he did not manage to complete his saying when his soul departed and he died. Whereupon Rabbi Yishmael exclaimed, happy are you, Ben Dama, for you were pure in body and your soul left you in purity. You have not transgressed the words of your colleagues. He who breaks through offense, a serpent shall bite him, right? Here it's a real serpent, but he's saying this is the serpents of the teaching of the minim. So this is very much a threat that Rabban Gamliel and the other rabbis of his generation have to deal with. We are going to continue with Lud, with Bnei Brak, with those things next time, because I have a few questions here I see, and I have running out of time. What questions do we have? Okay. Oh,
unless they were sent to you privately or not freely, you were very clear for questions. There are, unless, again, to me, I don't see any really. Just asking the court. You spoke
okay.
about Yavne. The one question you spoke, why they chose Yavne. It's already there.
Can I please ask a question? Okay. I couldn't get the chat to work. I found it interesting to compare. The daughters of Lot also thought that they were the last ones in the world, and they thought to reproduce by sleeping with their father, Lavdia, rather than committing suicide like Latzada.
Interesting comparison. I don't think I have ever heard that comparison before, but why
not? That's what everyone tells me about what I say.
All right, good. Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much. Thank